If you think this is just another Prince Harry headline you can scroll past, don't. Because what's unfolding in London right now isn't just messy, it's the kind of courtroom drama that doesn't simply trend for a day and disappear. It lingers, it shapes impressions, it hardens opinions. And if you've been watching Harry's ongoing war with the British press, you already know the stakes aren't just legal. They're personal, public, and reputational. This isn't simply about what happened years ago. It's about what people believe now and whether they still believe him at all. Harry is back in the UK, and once again, he's locked into a legal fight with Associated Newspapers, the company behind the Daily Mail. And here's what makes this round feel different. The longer it goes on, the more it starts to look like the case isn't only challenging the tabloids, it's also putting Harry himself on trial in the court of public opinion. Not officially, of course, but practically, absolutely. Because every claim he makes invites scrutiny, every piece of evidence raises fresh questions, and every time the defense pushes back with receipts, it chips away at the clean, simple narrative he's been trying to maintain. For years, Harry has positioned himself as the man taking on the machine. He's painted the tabloids as a relentless force that hounded him, invaded his privacy, endangered his family, and turned his life into an ongoing spectacle. And look, on a human level, it's not hard to understand why that hits a nerve. The British press can be brutal. It can be invasive. It can be cruel. It can take a real person's pain and turn it into content. That's not controversial. That's history. But the problem for Harry is that sympathy doesn't automatically equal credibility, and credibility doesn't come from anger alone. It comes from consistency. And consistency is exactly what's being tested right now. At the heart of it, Harry is accusing the Daily Mail and other outlets of unlawful information gathering, phone hacking, private investigators, questionable tactics, shady methods, the whole ugly list. He's framing it as a serious breach of privacy, a pattern of behavior that crossed legal and moral lines. And by itself, that's a claim many people would be ready to take seriously. But in this case, the argument isn't unfolding in a vacuum. It's unfolding in a context where Harry's relationship with the press has always been complicated, sometimes hostile, sometimes cooperative, and, if we're being honest, sometimes strategically beneficial. Because here's the part that keeps creeping into the story, whether Harry likes it or not. There have been moments where the press didn't just take access to Harry. There were moments where access was granted, sometimes deliberately, sometimes casually, sometimes because that's what royal life required. And now those moments, some of which probably felt normal at the time, are being pulled into the spotlight, examined, and used as counterweight to his claims. This is where two names come in: Rebecca English and Katie Nichols. Both are prominent royal journalists with long histories in the space, and both are pushing back in ways that aren't just defensive. They're pointed, they're strategic, and in some respects, they're personally awkward for Harry because they don't rely on generic tabloid smear tactics. They rely on proximity, they rely on familiarity, they rely on a simple implication that lands hard. We weren't strangers. We didn't sneak into your life. You knew us. Katie Nichols' defense is essentially, hold on, are we really pretending you didn't let me in? She claims Harry personally invited her to a private event at the Kensington Roof Gardens. Not a public press call, not a staged photo line, a private party. She says she socialized with him, spent time with his circle, and even stayed in touch afterward. And her argument isn't that she got information through some shadowy pipeline. Her argument is that she had access because Harry gave it to her. Now, imagine what that does to the vibe of a case built around the idea of constant unlawful intrusion. Because even if unlawful tactics existed elsewhere, this detail introduces something the audience can't unsee. Harry isn't only describing a press that hunted him. The defense is describing a relationship where he sometimes interacted, sometimes participated, sometimes maintained connections. That doesn't make the tabloids good, but it does make the story messier. And in a courtroom, messy is dangerous, because messy creates doubt. Messy creates alternative explanations. Messy invites jurors, judges, and the public to ask, so what exactly is the line here? And did you always enforce it? And that's why this is embarrassing, Not because inviting a journalist to a party is inherently scandalous, but because it clashes with the emotional simplicity of the victim narrative. It forces people to hold two ideas at once, that Harry feels violated by the press and that he has also at times engaged with the press in ways that undercut his own framing. And the moment people are forced into that mental balancing act, certainty starts to crumble. Rebecca English is pushing back too, and her defense leans on a similar strategy: normalize what Harry is trying to criminalize. Harry's team introduced an email from 2007 that they claim shows English attempting to obtain flight details for his then-girlfriend, Chelsea Davy. Harry's side wants that to look like something illicit, like a window into a broader ecosystem of intrusion. English's legal team says it was routine reporting, standard inquiry, not a criminal conspiracy. They also point to her long-standing professional relationship with Harry during his years as a working royal. The implication is clear: she wasn't an outsider lurking in the shadows. She was a known figure in the royal media landscape, someone operating in a space where access, briefing, interactions, and exchanges were part of the system. And again, none of this proves unlawful behavior didn't happen, but it does complicate Harry's attempt to paint a stark black-and-white picture. It suggests the relationship between Harry and royal reporters wasn't just predator and prey, it was an ecosystem. And once you admit it's an ecosystem, the entire emotional framing shifts. That's why the optics are turning ugly. The case starts to feel less like a noble mission and more like a highly personal vendetta fueled by selective memory. And selective memory is a tough sell when you're standing in court and the other side is waving around reminders of the times you didn't act like someone desperate for absolute separation. Public sympathy has a limit, and it usually breaks the moment people feel they're being asked to ignore obvious contradictions. Reports say Harry looks tense in court, stressed, uncomfortable, on edge. And who wouldn't be? He's trying to argue that he's been targeted unfairly, while defense teams are presenting moments that suggest the relationship was more complicated. He's accusing journalists of behavior that could land them in serious legal trouble, while his own past choices are being dragged into the light and dissected. That's the thing about court. You don't get to control the narrative the way you do in interviews. In court, every claim becomes a question. Every emotion becomes a weakness. Every dramatic framing invites someone to say, "Prove it." And then you get the part that makes people sit up: the alleged outburst. Sources claim Harry shouted at the judge, invoked his royal birthright, and basically declared he can't lose. Now, whether that happened exactly like that or not, even the idea of it is brutal for him. Because it feeds a perception that's been growing for a while: that Harry wants the benefits of being royal when it suits him, and the moral high ground of rejecting royalty when it doesn't. If the public sees him as demanding special treatment, it doesn't read as principled, it reads as entitled. And entitlement is poison in a case like this. The UK legal system is supposed to run on the principle that everyone is equal before the law. The moment a prince looks like he's leaning on status, even emotionally, it becomes a public relations disaster. Because people don't respond to legal arguments in a vacuum. They respond to vibes. They respond to body language. They respond to whether someone seems grounded in reality or floating above it. And that's the bigger issue here. This isn't only about a single lawsuit. It's about Harry's broader war against the media, his credibility, and what's left of his public image. Because right now, he's losing ground. The sympathy that used to follow him, the grieving son, the young man caught in an impossible situation, has been thinning. People are worn out. They're tired of endless litigation, constant grievances, and the growing sense that he's operating by a different set of rules than everyone else. There's a fatigue factor that people underestimate. Even if someone agrees with you in principle, they can still get tired of hearing about it. The more often you return to the same battle, the more people start to wonder whether you're fighting for justice or fighting because you can't let it go. And once that perception takes hold, you don't get to simply explain your way out of it. People decide you're stuck. People decide you're obsessed. People decide you're addicted to conflict. Here's the real kicker. All of this drama is playing out while the UK is dealing with real pressure. People are struggling with bills. Inflation has hit hard. Public services are stretched. And in that context, you've got Prince Harry living in California, suing newspapers over events from years ago. That contrast is deadly because it makes the fight look less like a universal moral cause and more like a privileged man's personal grievance project. It lands as tone deaf, and the public reacts accordingly. That's why so many people are turning on him, not only because of the case details, but because of what it represents. A man who seems disconnected from everyday reality, yet still insists the public must treat his battles as the defining issue of the moment. In a country where people feel squeezed, the appetite for royal drama drops fast. And yes, he's no longer a working royal, but he's still trading on royal identity, whether he admits it or not. He's still benefiting from the brand while rejecting the responsibilities. That contradiction is exactly what critics latch onto. And then there's the privacy argument, the one Harry keeps circling back to. He talks about wanting privacy, about protecting his family, about escaping intrusion. But at the same time, he has repeatedly chosen extremely public platforms to tell his story. Major interviews, streaming projects, and a memoir that aired intimate family dynamics to the world. You can argue he had reasons. You can argue he was defending himself. But you can't argue it doesn't weaken the purity of the privacy narrative, because the public hears that and asks one question. Which is it? Do you want to be left alone, or do you want to stay famous and rich? Because you can't build a global brand on exposure and simultaneously demand the world stop looking. The moment you monetize the story, you invite the counterargument that you're not fighting for privacy. You're fighting for control, not privacy. Control. And control is different. Control means you want the press quiet when it hurts, and loud when it helps. Control means you want the spotlight when you're paid for it, and darkness when you're criticized. The public can smell that. And once they smell it, they stop listening to the moral argument and start watching for hypocrisy. Let's be honest. The victim narrative is wearing thin. That doesn't mean Harry hasn't suffered. It doesn't mean he doesn't have legitimate grievances. But at some point, people expect you to take responsibility for your own path. You can't blame the press for every bad outcome forever. Eventually, it starts to sound less like truth and more like avoidance. People want to see growth. They want to see accountability. They want to see someone move forward. Instead, they see someone relitigating the past again and again, like the act of fighting is the only thing keeping the identity intact. And the timing makes it worse. The royal family has been trying to stabilize after the Queen's death and the transition into Charles's reign. They want the image of unity. They want stability. And then Harry shows up with another major lawsuit that drags the entire royal media ecosystem back into the headlines. It's not helping anyone. And if Charles wants reconciliation, Harry's making it nearly impossible. How do you reconcile when one side is still throwing legal grenades into the public sphere? Even if Harry believes he's right, the optics look like chaos. Honestly, it feels like these lawsuits are doing more harm than good. They're alienating the British public, bruising his reputation, and dragging the monarchy into fresh embarrassment. It's lose-lose for everyone involved. If there's any smart move left, it's to step back, rethink the strategy, and stop feeding the cycle, because right now he's digging himself deeper, and it's getting harder to watch. So what happens next? That's the question. He's boxed himself in. The cases keep dragging. His image keeps sliding. He looks more isolated than ever. And you can't help wondering who's advising him, whether he's surrounded by people who tell him what he wants to hear instead of what he needs to hear. Because if someone were being honest with him, they'd probably tell him to cut his losses, shift focus, and stop letting this fight define his life. The tragedy is that Harry does have the ability to do meaningful work. He has done meaningful work. Veterans, mental health, real causes. But all of that gets drowned out by this endless media war. It starts to look like he can't quit the attention, even when it's negative. And the press? They love it. Every lawsuit, every allegation, every uncomfortable reveal becomes fuel. The machine doesn't die when you fight it. Sometimes it gets stronger because conflict is content. Maybe the healthiest thing he could do is vanish for a while. Go quiet, spend time with his family, figure out what he wants beyond this fight. Heal instead of relive it. But I don't see him stepping away. He seems too invested in the victimhood story, too convinced that backing down would mean admitting defeat. And if that's true, this gets worse before it gets better. More lawsuits, more revelations, more outrage, and a public image that keeps cracking until there's nothing left to protect.